What's up guys, my name is Ace, and right before the weekend began, we got a really big update in Black Ops 7, including a bunch of weapon balancing and many other changes. And unfortunately, my weekend was already planned, so I didn't have time to cover that until today. But now it's time, and we'll dive right into this with the Maddox RFB. Specifically with the Prestige attachment, the Echo Fire Barrel, we saw a few adjustments here. The first thing is we saw a slight improvement to both of our damage ranges. And you can see that displayed right here. It's nothing major, but there's a little bit more range to it now. And then the other big thing with this attachment is they mentioned there's reduced view kick now, and we can see that very clearly here. There's definitely less magnitude to the recoil, so it is going to be a little easier to control. They also fixed an issue where the headshot barrel wasn't working properly, but should be now. And they also addressed an issue where this was dealing more damage in water than anticipated, so they fixed that issue as well. Then after that, getting into the MXR-17, its Prestige attachment also saw an adjustment, this time a nerf though, and with this, they just increased the amount of view kick, so it's actually got some recoil climb now, as we can see, whereas pre-patch, it was recentering almost perfectly between every shot that you fired, even if you were at the maximum fire rate. So this will just make it a little more difficult to control. And as much as I love this attachment, this was probably necessary. I was actually in the middle of recording my gun guide when this update hit, and then I just stopped where I was at right there. And in that gun guide, which will be coming very soon, so if you guys haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do so you don't miss that. I'm going to be praising this attachment quite a bit. Even after this nerf, it's still a very solid choice. But then after that, the X9 Maverick got a little bit of a nerf as well, and with this, they just increased the burst fire delay from 120 milliseconds up to 150 milliseconds. And what this means is if you're getting a one burst kill, there's no difference here whatsoever, so we're still killing incredibly fast at 180 milliseconds, it just makes it a lot less forgiving. If you don't get that one burst kill, it's going to take you that extra 30 milliseconds to get the second burst out, and that just solidifies this more as a high risk, high reward type of weapon, and I think this was an appropriate change. And then finally, for the assault rifle category, the DS-20 Mirage saw some buffs. The first thing is they very slightly increased its minimum damage range. And in core game modes, the only thing this impacts is the number of headshots required when not using the headshot barrel in the minimum damage range. Previously, you needed to mix 3 headshots in to get a 4-shot kill. Now you just need to mix 2 in. However, I would say most importantly, this has an impact on hardcore game modes. Now, in that minimum damage range, we maintain a one-shot kill potential to the body, meaning this gun will now always be a one-shot kill in hardcore modes as long as you're not shooting through something. And then on top of that, they buffed the integrated grenade launcher on the DS-20 by increasing the total damage from 25 up to 34, so it can now be a 3-hit kill rather than a 4-hit kill. They also increased the explosive radius from 1.2 meters up to 1.6 meters, and then finally, they increased the projectile speed. So that part at least looks to be very noticeably more powerful than it was pre-patch. Then let's get into the SMG category, and the first thing to point out here is the Kogot-7 got a buff with its Akimbo attachment. The first thing is they reduce the penalty that you get to your hipfire spread when using Akimbo, so it's going to be a bit more accurate in hipfire. But on top of that, they also buffed the Hawker ported compensator, so that will give you better hipfire improvement as well, and that can be stacked with the Akimbo attachment to get noticeably better hipfire spreads than previously. And then finally, 2 more attachments got adjusted here, and these were across the board for the SMG category. So keep that in mind, this one applies to all SMGs. I'm not going to repeat it as I go through the others. On the control stock, the one that helps with your vertical and horizontal recoil, they removed the penalties. So your aim down sight and aim walking speed penalty, those don't exist anymore on that stock, which makes it that much more attractive. And also across the board for SMGs, when using the overpressured ammunition, it not only improves your velocity, it will now also improve your damage range by 5 to 14% depending on the gun. So that makes this attachment on SMGs that much more attractive as well. And then on top of that, for SMGs, we saw several more attachment improvements. Keep in mind for these, it applies to all of the SMGs outside of the Dravik as well as the Kogot-7. For both of the rear grips that can have an impact on your recoil for SMGs, they've buffed those across the board. And then on top of that, for that recoil control stock, not only did we see the penalties removed, but on all of the SMGs aside from the Kogot and the Dravik, we also saw further recoil improvements for all of the other SMGs when using that stock. So this is designed to just make it so we have the potential to get more accuracy out of our SMGs now, as long as we're using these rear grip or stock recoil attachments. Then getting into the shotgun category, unfortunately, I'm not going to have pre-patch versus post-patch data here because I haven't collected all the pre-patch data yet when it comes to shotguns. So instead, we're just going to take a look at the general changes here. The first big thing is they changed Dragon's Breath across the board. And the way they describe this is Dragon's Breath should now feel more consistent at range, even when hitting fewer pellets, as it's going to rely less on the damage over time, that burn damage that takes place after the fact, and instead it's going to be applying that damage immediately. But they also say close range power with Dragon's Breath will be lower, which will make the default ammo a better choice for closer range engagements, and this is more so if you're just stretching your ranges out a bit, Dragon's Breath will be more powerful. And again, that applies to all of the shotguns across the board. Now, on top of that, the Akita saw some adjustments, and especially the Akimbo Akita, which we covered on Friday, right before this update went live. But with the base Akita, they did slightly reduce all of our range values, and you can see that here, pre-patch versus post-patch. And then when it comes to the Akimbo Akita, we saw some pretty big nerfs here. And as we can see, just looking at the ranges pre-patch versus post-patch, now we can't even hit a player beyond 9 meters with the Akimbo Akita. So a very, very short potential damage range with this. And on top of that, our power within those ranges have been reduced. So our new 2-shot kill range, or effectively 1 shot if you fire both of these shotguns at the same time, that requires you now to be practically touching the enemy player. And then on top of that for Akimbo, they reduced the number of shots it takes to overheat from 15 down to 13. So if you fire continuously for 13 rounds, you will overheat. And I've got to say when it comes to this, outside of tiny map playlists where of course shotguns are going to excel, I really didn't see a problem with the Akimbo Akita pre-patch. I even said in that video that I would rather use the single Akita rather than Akimbo. And now after this update, I don't see any reason whatsoever to use the Akimbo Akita, and it's clearly the better choice to use a single one over that. So I think that's a little unfortunate, but at the same time, I would much rather something like that be a little too weak than too powerful, so I guess it just is what it is. In either case, after that, let's get into the LMG category, and with this, similar to the SMGs, they removed the penalties that came with the control stock, the one that helps with recoil. It will no longer harm our aim down sight speed or aim walking speed on either of the LMGs. Then getting into the marksman rifle category, we saw that exact same thing happen with the M8 using that control stock. It will no longer have those penalties attached to it. Plus, it got some recoil buffs on top of that. And in addition to that, our rear grip attachments that help with recoil are now going to be helping even more with recoil when using the M8. Then for the Warden 308, this one got quite a drastic nerf. They reduced its rate of fire potential from 600 rounds per minute all the way down to 480 rounds per minute. And with that, I also wanted to show you just the recoil comparison, since anytime you change rate of fire, that tends to have an impact on what your recoil ends up looking like. And we can see that means there's a little bit less total climb to our recoil. Well, there's more time to recenter between shots, and that's why we're seeing a slightly lower magnitude. And then finally for marksman rifles, for the Novaline, they slightly increased the amount of view kick we experience. And looking at it pre-patch versus post-patch, there's still very little view kick, or at least there's plenty of time for this gun to recenter between each burst. So realistically, this thing is still pinpoint accurate. However, they did also slightly increase the amount of flinch you experience when using this gun. And then on top of that, when using semi-auto select fire, they've reduced our fire rate potential from 324 rounds per minute down to 240 rounds per minute. However, they also reduced the amount of vertical and horizontal recoil we'll see when using it in semi-auto. Now, after that, let's talk sniper rifles. And with the VS Recon, they reworked the damage profiles a little bit. And instead of going through each of the numbers, let's just have a look at what that does to our one-hit kill potentials. And as we can see, post-patch in our maximum damage range, which the ranges didn't change at all, but within 0 to 61 meters, we can now get a one-shot kill to the upper leg as well as anywhere above there. In the medium damage range from 61 meters to 86.4 meters, we maintain our one-shot kill potential to the lower torso. And then beyond 86 meters, nothing's really changed here, effectively speaking. It's still only going to be a one-shot to the neck or head. Now, on top of that, they buffed the rapid fire attachment on this. Previously, it would boost our rate of fire up to 46 rounds per minute. Now it's 55 rounds per minute with rapid fire, and that was a very appropriate change in my eyes, since rapid fire just felt practically useless pre-patch. And then we did see a handful of other attachment adjustments here. We saw some nerfs to the attachments that improve our flinch resistance, so they're not going to help our flinch resistance quite as much as previously. And they also nerfed the Strelok laser, so you're not going to get nearly as accurate while you're in the process of aiming down sight with that laser as you were pre-patch. Now, it turns out we saw those same attachment changes to the Shadow SK, and on top of that, they also slightly reworked our damage profile, but interestingly, the only thing this changed from a one-shot kill zone perspective is in the maximum damage range, it's no longer a one-shot kill to the hand. Everything else is the same here when it comes to that one-shot kill potential. However, it is also worth noting they did reduce our rate of fire from 100 rounds per minute down to 86 rounds per minute. So that's a fairly notable nerf when it comes to our rate of fire potential. And that means overall for this sniper rifle, at least effectively speaking, it's going to be noticeably less powerful than it was pre-patch. And then finally for snipers, the XR3 Ion saw a bunch of buffs actually, and with this, they reduced the amount of flinch you receive from 0.85 newtons down to 0.75 newtons. They really nicely improved our bullet velocity up to 1200 meters per second. That's an insane bullet velocity value, so it's going to be hit scan at like essentially any range you'll find in multiplayer. On top of that, they improved our aim down sight speed from 650 milliseconds down to 600 milliseconds. They reduced the amount of idle sway you experience, and they improved stability when jumping and landing with this sniper rifle. So a bunch of base buffs to the gun. And then on top of that, there were some attachment adjustments. For the 3x3 compensator, they reduced the charge time penalty from 200% down to 100%. They did nerf our maximum hip spread improvement with this though. However, the hip spread from movement expands and decays nearly instantly. Now on top of that, we saw that same nerf to the Strelok laser as we saw with the other sniper rifle. So as you're transitioning from hip fire to aim down sight, this will be less effective with that attachment. And then finally, with the quick charge attachment, they increased the improvement to our charge time from 15% up to 30%. However, in exchange for that, they reduced the improvement you get on our burst cooldown, and they increased the penalties to our recoil as well as bullet velocity when using this attachment. And that finally wraps it up for the primary weapons. However, there's a couple others here to mention. With the A.R.C M1 launcher, they doubled our projectile speed, and they also made it so it can no longer be intercepted by a trophy system. As for the ballistic knife, they buffed this in a few ways. The first thing is they removed the pre-fire delay that used to exist. That's actually something I didn't pick up on when I did my breakdown, but there was a pre-fire delay. Now there isn't. The moment you pull the trigger on that, it will fire unless you're sprinting, in which case you have to complete the sprint out time still. On top of that, they improved our projectile speed with the ballistic knife, and they reduced the vertical arc on it. And there we go. That wraps it up for all of the weapon balancing that took place. However, this update wasn't just weapon balancing. There were a bunch of other very notable changes, so let's get through those. The first thing is in hardpoint. When standing on the hardpoint, instead of getting that 10 score every few seconds for standing on the hardpoint, now you'll get 15. Then on top of that, we saw some general spawn updates. The first thing is they reduced the strength of owned domination zones, which means that spawns may be a little more flippy in domination, and that kind of concerns me. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to actually play the game since this update went live, so let me know if you've noticed any changes there to that. But on top of that, they increased the distance of sight distance checks to reduce near enemy spawns. They adjusted enemy influencer strength across all maps, and they adjusted spawn logic in sharpshooter. So just several adjustments to spawns across the board. Then when it comes to equipment, they reduced the fuse time window for cluster grenade, mini grenade detonations for more consistent explosion timing. They added one hunter bot to the base ammo count. And if you guys missed it, I just recently covered the hunter bot in great detail. That was made before this update went live. But now you get an additional hunter bot when you first spawn in. So you spawn in with 2 by default or 3 with the TAC Expert wildcard. And that is actually quite powerful. If you guys watch that video, you'll see just how powerful these hunter bots are. Then for field upgrades, they made it so the trophy system will now ignore the combat axe, and they reduced the Black Hat charge time from 2 minutes down to 1.5 minutes. Then for score streaks, we saw a bunch of adjustments. For both UAVs and counter UAVs, they reduced the duration of them by 5 seconds. For the skewer, they increased the velocity when equipped with the high efficiency fuel overclock. For the sentry turret, they increased the targeting degree and angles, so it'll have improved coverage. They decreased the target acquisition time, so it'll lock onto targets a little bit faster. They increase the amount of damage it deals, and they increase durability against frag, cluster, and sticky grenades. So the sentry got a handful of buffs there. Then for the interceptors, with the air patrol overclock equipped, they will now perform an additional pass for a total of 3 passes. For the dog, when in sentry mode using the overclock, it will now receive a 25% reduced damage when hunkered in sentry mode. For the rhino, they increase the movement speed slightly. For the harp, they increase the durability against the A.R.C M1 from 2 to 3 hits to kill, and I'm really glad to see that. And then finally, for the EMP, they reduce the amount of score required from 1450 down to 1300. And for the discount bonus overclock, they've reduced the discount from 150 score to 100 score. Now after that, there were a handful of fixes to certain challenges that were just not working properly or not tracking properly. I'm not going to read through every single one of them since this doesn't really impact the gameplay at all. There were also a few UI adjustments here, like weapon attachment information on kill cams and the best play. And then they fixed a couple issues with the weekly challenges and how they were displayed in the UI. For the VTOL, they improved the crash sequence on it. It was really janky pre-patch, so it's nice to see they resolved that. And then finally, the last thing here to mention for multiplayer is when a counter UAV is in the air with the Vigilance perk pre-patch, it had this horrible sound attached to it that triggered my tinnitus really bad. And I know a lot of other people were complaining about this as well. They've removed that audio from the game now, which is so nice to see. It actually got so bad that I would often have to take my headset off anytime somebody called a counter UAV in. And there we have it. That's finally going to wrap it up for all of the changes that took place when it comes to multiplayer with Friday's update. And this was quite a big update that changed a lot of things that actually impact gameplay. And overall, just looking at it on paper, these are generally looking like very good changes. I think most of the weapon balancing was very appropriate. But of course, I want to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How are you feeling about this update, especially now that we've had the weekend to play with it? Are you guys generally happy with the changes they've made here, or maybe not so much? If you enjoyed this one, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.